I think in society, people with disabilities are often viewed as weak, as meek, as kind of helpless and inspirational. That's kind of the opposite of what an athlete is, right? An athlete is someone who's powerful and strong and tough. And I think to kind of be able to shift that paradigm, not only for society, but for individuals themselves, is something really powerful. There are a bunch of people with disabilities who do want to compete. And I think for many of those folks, for many years, that was not an opportunity they thought was possible for them. Being able to go to someone and say, hey, like, this is an option for you, and telling them that's on their menu, I think can be really profound to like give them an opportunity to see themselves as an athlete for someone who's never looked at themselves in that way.
So we've got two chapters of ParaCliffHangers. We've got the East Coast and we've got the West Coast.
PCH started in New York City when I was living there in late 2019. And then I moved to the Bay Area about a year later, and I brought a branch of PCH with me.
Within each region, we actually have a few different chapters now. Being able to expand outside of New York and include cities like Durham and North Carolina. And then over the West Coast recently, we've added chapters in Southern California and more Bay Area chapters as well.
The Bay Area branch has really exploded. It's been really great to see. There's just a lot of energy, a lot of interest, a lot of stoke.
We're seeing a really significant increase in participation this year from last, and a whole lot of new faces. There are 25 to 30 competitors for PCH this year, and about 45 PCH community members in general. So this year there's going to be quite a few PCH athletes first time at a competition.
My favorite thing is it's going to an event where being a person with a disability, you're not the minority in the gym. And ironically, that has now become the case at pretty much every Friday night at Berkeley Ironworks, which is very, very cool. You're in a space where it's super normalized to talk about disability. There's just an absurd amount of wheelchairs, an absurd amount of service dogs. It's basically a space where you're the majority for once in a world in which you're almost always the minority. That's very cool and empowering.
I think at least half of the PCH athletes are PCH touchstone athletes, which means that we receive the coaching help, the financial help, the physical access help. What that really enables PCH to do is focus on the community building and the athlete development. That's why you're going to see Colin this year, who is a Team Touchstone coach, who's been helping us understand how to compete. His experience and his knowledge there is really valuable.
I saw a lot of really cool progress in PCH in the lead up to nationals. Some climbers needed to work on endurance. Some of them needed to work on route reading. When we started, a lot of them didn't have too much competition experience.
With all of our new competitors, a lot of them don't quite understand the difference between on-site and red point, or what that looks like, or how they should prepare.
So at each session, we were able to nail down those logistical questions. And by the end, in our mock competition before nationals, everyone had a really good sense for how the comp might work, and everyone seemed super prepared.
It's been this cool melding of, I know a lot about access needs and accessibility, and Colin knows a lot about climbing, but has not worked with the disability community before. And so to kind of meld those things is interesting. And I think what's cool about Colin is he wasn't nervous. For many people, they'd be like, I don't know how to teach someone who can't how to climb. I don't know how to teach someone who's missing a limb to climb. But Colin was like, yeah, I know how to do it. If I don't know how to do it, I'll ask and I'll learn. And I think that's such a cool mindset. One big hurdle for adaptive climbing is routes. It is very hard to get on routes that are accessible or that are set with adaptive climbers in mind.
Something that Touchstone has been really supportive of is setting adaptive specific routes. Both campus routes and visually impaired routes has been a huge help for us to be able to train in adaptive climbing specifically.
Because it's not just about having money to physically be here. It's about the route setters reading through all those route setting guidelines and putting up not just one route, but multiple routes all year long for us to be able to practice on. Every step of the way, Touchstone has been 100% in.
I'm incredibly thankful to what Touchstone has done and embracing adaptive route setting. And I also think there's just no reason for every gym not to do this. It benefits your adaptive community and it benefits your community as a whole. The first step to competing at Paraclimbing Nationals is you have to know there is a Paraclimbing Nationals. And for many folks with disabilities, one, they don't even know if they can climb. And two, if they climb, they don't even know that there's a competition that's accessible for them. Parasports are not always on TV. They're not always in commercials. They're not typically in your middle schools, your high schools, your colleges. And so for many folks, the first barrier is just knowledge. The next step to competing at nationals is if you want to be classified, get a doctor to sign a specific form, basically putting you in several different disability categories. And the role of the classification system is to attempt to create equity in the sport such that people with like-minded disabilities are competed against people with like-minded disabilities. Although for many people, that's a pretty significant hurdle because the American healthcare system isn't often cooperative.
The classification process is really emotionally brutal. It's at this intersection of disability and sport where you go into a room with a bunch of doctors and they tell you how disabled you are, basically, and whether or not your conception of your disability is eligible to compete against other people. It doesn't mean that someone doesn't have a disability if they're not eligible to compete in paraclimbing, but it is a change from how paraclimbing used to be. 5 years ago, when we weren't so far along the road to Paralympic inclusion, so many more people were able to compete in paraclimbing. Now, people who've been part of the community for a long time are seeing themselves classed out. When you hear us say classed out, it means that they came all the way here and paid a lot of money to come to be told their disability is not eligible for competition. They still get to compete at nationals in the open category, but anyone who competes in the open category does not have eligibility to compete on the world circuit, regardless of how they perform. It ends here for them at nationals. If they're not sponsored by a team, they probably paid everything out of pocket. So this year, regardless of whether you would classify or not, PCH did sponsor all of our athletes to come compete here in the open category.
This is like very, very cool to see all these people from our growing organization. A few basic things. Check the document tonight before you go to bed because Stacy and I are gonna update some carpools. 2 days of climbing. We have qualifiers and we have finals. You can climb each qualifier route up to 3 times.
Climbing is inherently an individual sport, and PCH is inherently about individual growth and personal fulfillment and everyone getting to push themselves in a certain kind of way. We kind of want to create a space where you come and it's not only about your climbing weekend, but it's about connecting with people both close to you and far from you who are all united under one goal and united under one organization and building those bridges. And, you know, it's about more than the competition. I care about people being a better version of themselves than they were a couple months ago.
This is the second nationals competition that we are really officially sponsoring. So we are a new face in the competition scene. We're bringing a huge amount of athletes. You're gonna see our shirts pretty much everywhere. I mean, you're gonna definitely see a lot of our faces, both at qualifications and definitely at finals.
When you're in the climbing gym, you're often adapting your climbing, right? That's kind of where the phrase comes from inherently. And the very empowering thing about being at nationals is you are with a group of other people who know that experience, internalize that experience, and maybe be climbing in the same way as you. And you may get to actually look at someone and say, oh, like I'm actually getting to steal beta from someone for once. And that can be a relatively rare experience.
This is the time to share resources, experience, knowledge, test ourselves against people with similar disabilities. And for people just getting into the adaptive climbing community, to meet mentors and idols, someone where you can see yourself mirrored in them.
So by having a proper competition, it really normalizes paraclimbing, and it really gives a lot of respect to the people who pour their heart and souls into paraclimbing training. This is a real discipline that has really taken off.
One of my favorite parts about climbing in an adaptive climbing competition is that the routes are set for us. I think people with disabilities are very used to adapting, right? The built environment is traditionally not very accessible. And so what do? You adapt. You're constantly coming up with creative accessibility solutions. But at the end of the day, it feels really nice to go into a gym and know I don't have to adapt this. These routes were set with us in mind.
I've actually talked to a lot of people who say, hey, I tune in for the paraclimbing live streams specifically because it's really interesting to see how different disabilities approach the same routes. You know, when you look at some of these able-bodied elite competitions, you're watching people climb the route in the same way for the most part, most of the time. If someone breaks the beta, that's a pretty significant event in an able-bodied competition. With paraclimbing, you're gonna see people with limb differences on different sides approach the same route. You're gonna see people with a lot of different types of bodies and ways of moving compete against each other on these routes, and it's just a super, super interesting thing to watch. When I first started coming to nationals as a lone competitor, I was blown away by seeing a lot of people like me. Now I pretty much see that every week. Just walk into a touchstone gym during a PCH meetup and you're like, whoa.
PCH was supposed to be a chill meetup once every couple weeks in one gym in New York City. We just saw what the need was. We built it and people came. There are so many communities that don't have this access yet, and I know there are people with disabilities who live in those cities who would benefit from finding this community. And, I want to play a part in making it happen.